Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I am Sal, and I'm joined today by Ram V. Welcome, first timer on the show, Ram. Thank you so much for being here, man.
Yeah, real pleasure to be here. I've heard very good things about the show from everyone you've chatted with, so pleasure to be here as well.
I'm happy to have you, man. I'm scared about that reputation because if I falter in any way, you're gonna be like, "Well, Chip said you were cool. What the hell, man?"
Yeah, you're being judged every minute, every sentence.
I feel it. Yeah, all those rumors when you were in middle school about like, no one's thinking about you. Guess what? They're all false. They are listening.
No,
but yeah,
but we're talking comics. It's supposed to be fun and casual and good times. So
exactly.
I'm looking forward to it.
Exactly. This is all thanks to a clandestine interaction between you and me. We've never really crossed paths in the past.
No, yeah.
I feel like there's definitely been a time at some convention where my wife went to your booth because she was a big fan of the new Swamp Thing, and
great.
She was, yeah. So I'm sure she's interacted with you at some point in the past. But you and I bumped into each other at New York Comic Con, which is the place to be apparently for that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I only come out to the States maybe twice a year, usually at San Diego and usually at New York. I used to do other conventions as well. I was at ECC a few years ago. I've been to C2E2, but as time's gone by, I'm also like, I kind of want to spend time with the family at home. I don't want to be at conventions all the time. So
totally.
It just makes sense for me to do the two sort of big, everyone's there and I can talk to people conventions.
Yeah.
I was on a chat with Robbie Billups on his pop culture YouTube show, and he was talking about, I'm going to get Heroes Con to invite you this year. So I'm like, yeah, great. If someone's inviting me, I will happily go along.
Oh, absolutely. No, that is so much easier. Although I understand if you're flying in from international, you may need to get a work visa in order to come out here.
No, I have a business visa.
Oh, great.
That lets me come out there because I don't really work at conventions. I don't really, because I'm a writer. I don't really do commissions or anything. Yeah. So I'm signing. Yeah, I table occasionally. I'm signing things, and so I don't really do work, if you will. So
fair. So my introduction to your work is a little more scattershot than most, because it's been like, I've heard your name, I've picked up a book that I was like, oh, Ram V wrote this one, but I haven't like followed your career extensively. But I wanted to talk more about the beginnings of your career, because I understand, as you refer to yourself, you're a writer. Comics kind of was a sudden decision for you, because it was you had originally decided to write anything. You were just like, I want to write. I write novels, prose.
Yeah.
And then it was, I understand it was like a cousin of yours who suggested you do comics. And
well, he didn't suggest I do comics. He just said like, oh, your style of writing is very visual. Have you ever thought about writing comics?
Yeah.
And it was just a passing suggestion. And he was studying to be a filmmaker at the time. And so I can understand, like, he was aware of the medium. And obviously I was aware of it. I had read comics as a kid, and I had fallen in love with them again when I was about 19, 20. I moved to the States, and I discovered Vertigo. I pretty much read all of Vertigo. Yeah. And so it was just like there was a switch in my head. I hadn't thrown, someone had to just walk by and flip it. And as soon as that happened, I was like, yeah, why haven't I thought about making comics? And about a couple of years after that, I had moved to the UK to study creative writing. And I had finished writing a novel as part of that course. I had a few short stories published as well. And I said, cool, I'm going to put a graphic novel together about Mumbai, which is where I was born and brought up. And I said, but I want to do something weird. I want to take like 60s crime noir as a medium, and then look at Mumbai and then nix the crime and just make it like strange existential noir stories about Mumbai. And that's what I did. That was kind of my first foray into recognizable work, I suppose.
Yeah. I noticed there's a trend in your work that I can easily identify a Ram V piece, and it's because it has this kind of grit that meets, I want to call it magical realism. where there's this otherworldly element to it, but it's not like it doesn't hit you over the head with it immediately. It's always
Right.
this kind of thing where you're exposed to something that you're familiar with genre based, when it comes to whether it's Batman or even Aquaman, Andromeda, where that turns into a kind of Lovecraftian horror thing pretty quickly, since you only have 3 issues to work with. But you know, but it starts with a grounded piece of grit, and then it turns into this kind of like, this is the world we're in, and like the world kind of turns on its side and becomes.
Yeah, I'm very interested in tenuous realities, right? Because I feel like characters, at least when in my stories, I love it when characters start out feeling very sure about who they are and what they are. And then about a quarter of the way through the story, you kind of shake the foundations of that character. And usually when you shake foundations, that means you have to change something that people hold to be fundamentally true about themselves. And usually that connects to how we think about reality. And, you know, so when you do that, I think the more visual, more tangible way to do it is to do that sort of, maybe reality isn't thought, you know, what you thought it was going to be. So there's a little bit of surrealism or a magical realism there.
Yeah.
And I find that to be, that's very much the kind of story I like telling as well, and I like reading as well. So
I like the idea that you're keying into, where there is a you're changing something fundamental about a person, and as a result, reality shifts as well, because like reality is about perception. It's about what we see and what we experience, and you know, it just so happens that we could also put monsters or, you know, other ideologies in there that upset the balance of what we consider to be, you know, stationary and true.
And it does this wonderful thing. Like, to me, when I was reading comics, when I said, you know, I fell in love with them a second time, that was largely through the work of people like Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore, and I think the thing that was really wonderful about Neil's approach to writing comic stories was that in his books, you always had the sense of like, oh, if you turn the right corner or the wrong one, depending on, you could witness something that suddenly changes your perception of reality.
Yes.
So this kind of idea that there's magic behind every mundane corner, you just don't see it. You just don't know it.
Yeah.
That idea is very fascinating because it suddenly makes grim things less grim, and it makes whimsical things that much more portentous, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love the idea of like, if only you dare to turn the corner.
Yeah, just look behind the veil a little bit.
Right.
And you'll suddenly question the truth of everything. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that approach, of course, informs a lot of your run. Although I find that your Catwoman run was particularly. I feel like that was probably one of the most grounded out of all the runs.
Yeah, and I do have very, very grounded stories as well. Like I've done Graffiti's Wall, that is also a very grounded slice of life story. So if anything, I'm a very scatterbrained person. Very, very low attention span when it comes to like, oh, that's fun, or oh, that's fun. Like every 2 seconds, I will be looking at something new and shiny. And so my interest in writing kind of tends to go the same way. I don't like to do the same kind of thing over and over. So yeah, every time I go into a book, I'm like, okay, cool. What haven't I done that I really enjoy? And so I want to kind of try my hand at. And with Catwoman, my brain just went like, it's Catwoman. It's a thief. I should just do the Ocean's movies as Catwoman stories. And that was really, and I was kind of shocked that aesthetic hadn't been hit upon before. Whereas to me, I was like, that's obvious. That's what you do with every cat. So quite literally, and I'm quite happy about this, I think 90% of every Catwoman story I've done has just been heists. Which
is like which is fun to read. I imagine it's fun to write. There's no complaints here about that, especially when like the conceit of Catwoman is she's a thief. What's she going to do? Like every element of her life is a heist in some regard. whether it's like pickpocketing, stealing a watch, or robbing a bank, or stealing a person.
Yeah, and then it has that sort of very smart aleck. Every character is a smart aleck in
Yes,
some
yes.
way.
Oh
And
yeah, especially in
so
heist movies.
really, yeah, really, really fun to write that kind of dialogue where
Mm-hmm.
everyone is razor sharp, everyone has wit, everyone is insinuating stuff. Like no one sentence is just saying what it means.
No, yeah, which is in and of itself like a heightened reality.
Yeah.
Which I always enjoy. I always like movies and comics that give me something that is reminiscent of reality, but turns up the volume.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the Soderbergh films as
Yes.
well, the Ocean's movies, because they are set in such surreal surroundings, like Vegas is in itself heightened reality, right?
Exactly.
Like I would even go so far as to say it's faked reality in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like, so both the first and the third Ocean's movies were like that, and then the second Ocean's movie is literally globe hopping through these gorgeous, beautiful locations all over the world. So again, this kind of unmoored, like everything is pretty, everything is beautiful, everything is fake,
Yes.
kind of reality to those movies. So yeah, you can do surrealism without actually having to leave reality. Yeah.
It's true. Do you I'm interested because I actually don't know the whole situation with your work on DC and in Marvel, in terms of, do you get to pick what you want to do, or do they come to you and say, "Oh man, Just League Dark, Rom V, that makes sense," or were you like, "I have a Just League Dark story, I want to do that," or "I have a Carnage book I want to do"? I mean, the Black, White, and Blood issue you did was so different from all the other stories that had come before it within the concept, but also just in terms of the approach. I mean, that was essentially like an Arctic horror story, and then you went with Carnage in it, or Carnage.
Yeah. See, I didn't really start off doing work at DC and Marvel.
Right.
I was already doing creator-owned work by the time I did my first DC story, and then I had already done a bunch of creator-owned stuff by the time Marvel got in touch. And so I always assume that people are getting in touch because they like what I have done before.
Absolutely.
And because this all came to me off of doing creator-owned work, my approach has always been, yeah, that's what I do, and that's why you've hired me, so I'm going to do stuff like I do.
Right.
And so that has always been the approach. But that's not to say, so originally with DC, I did a Swamp Thing annual because James Tynan, who was working on Justice League Dark at the time, had read D. Savage Shores.
Yeah.
And he went, "Hey, I think your work would fit really well with this story. Do you want to do an annual?" And so I did. So it's also, thanks and credit to editors and creators who read my work and went, "We think you'll be a great fit for this." And so Justice League Dark happened in a similar way. James was moving on to do Batman, and so I had already done these sort of one-shots on those books, and so I picked that up. The Catwoman gig happened off of work I had done with Jamie Rich. I had sent him Black Mamba, which is the noir book that I'd done, and he had enjoyed it. And it was right before he moved to the Bat Office. So when he did, he said, "Hey, do you want to come write some, one shots for me?" I said, "Oh, cool. I can write some Batman stories, sure."
Right.
And so that has always been the case. Even with Venom, the editor at Marvel, Devin, got in touch saying that, "Hey, Al's got one half of a story, and we'd like for you to do the other half." And so that's always been the case. And frankly, I think I work better as a writer, sort of exploring things that I'm interested in exploring, even with these characters at these companies, rather than me being asked to like plug into something that already exists, because I think part of my brain is just always wired to go, what has nobody else done that I want to do,
Yeah.
So because it's wired that way, that it's a little bit antithetical to people coming and going like, cool, we've got this book, do you want it, you know?
Exactly, exactly. But that is how a lot of projects come together. Where I've heard, you know, like editors or whatever go, oh, we would love to see someone tackle this character. We think you'd be perfect for it. Could you do that? You're more like, I have some idea here. Let me see if I can find an avenue to do it that way.
And sometimes what happens is I'll go and say like, hey, I've got an idea for this character. And sometimes that character is so obscure that my editors will go like, what? Why? Nobody's seen that character in I don't know how many decades.
Yeah.
But I'm still excited about it because I've got a story to tell.
Right.
And I think the benefit of stuff like that is obviously when I started out, I used to pitch things like that, and editors were like, nah, that's not going to happen, buddy. And that was fair enough. But now, over the years, since I've established a kind of like, look, I can do this, and I have it. There's a certain expectation when I write a book.
Right.
Now it's less of a risk to let me do these kind of semi-obscure characters.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of value in kind of sticking to your guns in terms of like, okay, I want to do this. Maybe not this year, maybe 4 years from now, but I still want to do
it. Is that in some way how The Vigil came to be? Because The Vigil was one of those stories, or one of those miniseries that I had heard about. I think by issue 3 had dropped, and people were like, "Are you reading The Vigil? Because oh my god!"
Right.
Like it was one of those like.
No, Vigil was Vigil was a very, very long labor of love, much before I had started writing comics at all. Yeah, I have sketches for The Vigil from like 2012 and 2013 in my book. It's an idea and a concept that I'd had in my head for a very long time, largely because there are no Indian espionage stories in contemporary media.
Yeah.
And people don't understand, but that part of the world is such a geopolitical hotbed, right? Like Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, China, and the at one point, I think close to 60% of the world's arms trade happened through the Northern Indian Corridor, illegal arms trade. At one point, 80% of the world's opium trade happened through the Northern Corridor of India. And India has an intelligence agency called RAW, that operates in that area, and they are next to unheard of.
Yeah.
In most international circles. And I had a theory when I was much younger. I would go, that's either because they are completely terrible at what they do,
right,
or they are very, very good at what they do.
Exactly.
And turns out they are exceptionally good at what they do. They don't do very good things. They don't do very nice things, but they're very good at what they do. And there's a lot of, I spent a lot of time talking to like intelligence experts and ex-RAW people that I knew of in India. And there were all of these stories that I felt like, oh man, no, like if you could talk about this would make like a wonderful, wonderful story.
Yeah.
And so there was a part of me that had always wanted to write like espionage stories that had an Indian connection, if you will. And Vigil was kind of born out that way. And then that piece really fit in well when Jessica Chen, who was editor at DC at the time, came to me and said, hey, look, we have this initiative. We want to introduce new characters with Asian roots into the DCU. Do you have anything of that sort? And I went, wow, boy, here's a 100-page file. No,
right. Here are my sketches. Here's my portfolio. Let's do this. They're like, whoa, okay.
So I did. So I pitched them that, and obviously the first question was like, okay, how does it tie into the DCU? And immediately my brain went, well, yes, of course it has to tie in, and it has to tie in via that sort of espionage-y vibe. But I didn't want to do a straight up like, you know, Checkmate or Human
League
Target
of
kind of.
Yeah,
yeah.
Exactly.
I wanted my sort of, you know, untethered reality element to it. So we went the other obvious route, which was Wildstorm and Planetary and Authority and all of that. So I leaned into that angle, and we came up with a new story that still had the bones of the old Vigil idea that I had worked on. But the amusing bit is like the visual elements, the mask on Saya, who you see up here,
Yes.
and the Arclight costume. All of those things were my designs. That I was like, here's a weird sketch from 2012 to the artist. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. That actually, that I think that tethers it further. It makes it more yours. It's like this is really something that I
absolutely.
I love that. There's a curiosity I have. I'm just interested to know, and this is unrelated. I apologize, but you wrote a Quake book.
Oh, you've done your research, then.
Yeah. And as an old school first person shooter gamer, I was like, yeah, all right, well, let's talk about that really quick. What was the impetus behind Quake Champions, and how did that come about? I mean, it didn't go back that far. It's like 2017, I think, but yeah.
Well, considering I only started making comics in 2016.
That's fair.
Right. So I think that answers part of your question.
That's true.
It was quite literally the first work for hire gig that I did. I had worked only on Black Mamba before then, and I had done a book called Brigands at Action Lab by then. But this was the first work for hire gig that came along. It was for Titan, and they were doing quite a few of these sort of video game centric comics.
Yeah.
The Titan editor got in touch and said, "Hey, we've got Quake," and immediately, I had this kind of life flashing by, except it was just my gamer life flashing by moment of like, oh yeah, I remember playing Arena, and I actually. More than that, I remember playing, because it's still connected to ID Software, the publisher. I remembered playing Doom, which was like my first obsession in terms of video games.
Oh, no
so kidding. Yeah. So I was like, great, let's do it. And it sounded cool because originally they were like, look, we want you to. These characters don't have any backgrounds.
Right.
We want you to come in and create like background stories for them. And that's kind of what I was doing.
Right.
I think issue 1, I got some pushback in terms of like, no, it needs to be a lot more action, because he's, I think it was about a soldier. I forget what character it was about.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, fine, we can turn it around. I literally had to turn that script around in 24 hours. So I was like, okay, cool. Let's just make it a whole singular start to finish action sequence. Yep. Yeah. So that's what I did. And then by issue 2, I think either they trusted me or they just went like, yeah, you know what? Let him just do whatever he wants to do in the corner.
There's only 3 issues. Knock yourself out.
Yeah. And I think from there on, the world building and the character building kind of gets more expansive as well.
It does. No, it's funny how you saying that really crystallizes it for me, because the first issue is like essentially one drawn out fight scene, which is great.
Yeah.
But then the dialogue ratchets up about like 100% by issue 2. Like we actually get character. I mean, there's character moments in the first issue, but like character development really is at the fore from the rest of the series onward. But I was just curious because I was like, Quake, that's fun. It's so rare that you get to see a comic book video game adaptation that has like that. Well, back then that had like that level of that has like Rom V writing it, as opposed to like just here's a Doom tie-in.
It wasn't like Rom V writing it. It was
it wasn't capital
some guy writing Quake, at that point in time.
Exactly.
Now,
I love that you play Doom.
Different. Yeah,
that's so great, because I also grew up playing Doom, and so it's very much a connection.
Oh yeah, I've been a big gamer pretty much all my life. I continue to do it today. Yeah.
Do you still play today, or do you not? Those games, obviously, but
I play Path of Exile now, which is my current obsession. I tend to be very. I have a very addictive personality by nature, so if I get like obsessed with something, I put every living minute into it.
Sure.
Which is not great for games that are designed to do that to you. So I spent like the better part of my life when I was studying in the States. I spent it playing World of Warcraft.
Oh yeah.
And now I've kind of tempered myself a little bit better, a little bit more organized into like, okay, I can play Path of Exile and then I can turn it off and do my work.
So you're not playing Baldur's Gate 3, like you just stayed away from it.
No, yeah, I have part of my sort of contract with my gamer side is that I can't do multiple games at once. So I will get to it at some point.
Gotcha.
But it'll probably be after I've played Path of Exile so much that I'm like, okay, I think we can take a break now, Rob.
Yeah. I'm playing Lethal Company right now with my friends. It's very simple. It's not even technically like a fully finished game, as I understand.
Right.
Like the game isn't even done. But
right. So you're playing like an early release version.
Yeah, exactly. Which is it's still fun. I'm like I love when a game is like very simple but has like explorative elements to it. You know, like almost like a Minecraft, where it's like you think you know what this is, and then you see that someone built a full scale model of the Starship Enterprise with it, and you're like, that would not have occurred to me.
Right.
But yeah, it's a lot of fun. Anyway.
Yeah, I think I could push in the opposing direction in that I love games that involve like sitting down with a spreadsheet for 2 hours trying to figure out what you're going to do when you log into the game.
Oh my god. Yeah, that went away from me very quickly. And that was like when I played Doom and stuff. Like I know people who like drew the maps and made their own. I used to make my own levels and stuff like that back in the day, but now I prefer to just go charging in and just go like, what's in this corner? Nothing. Okay, what's in this corner? Oh,
inefficient.
Yeah, it is. Oh no, it's very inefficient. But you get more Easter eggs that way. You find more stuff.
Yes, you do.
Going around those alleys that Neil Gaiman talked about.
Yes, absolutely.
But unfortunately, in those games, usually it's a drop off or a big monster you can't beat. But yeah.
Don't play Elden Ring like that.
No. Oh hell no. My wife plays those games. I am not that. But it's I meant to mention this. It's funny. I was looking back at your Marvel work. A lot of symbiotes.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much
it's all exclusively symbiote stuff.
Yeah, pretty much only worked with the symbiote office when I was writing for them. I mean, I didn't really do a lot of work at Marvel for very long.
No.
It so happened that the DC exclusive came along as well, and so and then my schedule got a little bit busier as well, so I had to pull back from some of those books. But largely, I've only worked with 2 offices at Marvel, maybe 3 if you count like a mini thing that I did. But I worked with Will Moss when he was editing. I think he's still editing Thor, and I did I forget the name of the event now.
Oh, War of the Realms.
Yeah, War of the Realms. I did a War of the Realms tie-in with Pascal Ferry on art.
Yes.
Which unfortunately, because of the COVID printing schedule, kind of fell by the wayside. But I enjoyed working on it. And then I worked with Devin Lewis in the Symbiote office, which is, I think, part of the Spider-Man office. Right.
That's funny. I never actually thought that there would be a I assumed it would be like the Spider office, but there's a symbiote division.
Oh yeah. I mean, there have to be. Look at the number of symbiotes they have.
That's true. Yeah, I guess that's a good point. Yeah.
Someone's got to keep track of them all.
Yeah, it ain't gonna be me. Can you talk about how you got involved with Future State a little bit?
I think I was already working on Catwoman at that point in time.
Yes.
And so I remember people started talking, and I was working on Swamp Thing as well. So those are the 2 Future State things I did.
Exactly.
And I remember at the time the editors were talking about, we're going to do a 2-month line-wide thing that's going to jump into the future and do these stories about potential futures for these characters. But with the Batman, with the Catwoman story, there was the caveat that it had to tie into what James was doing with Batman, because James's Batman Future State stories were kind of the flagpole that all the other stories were working towards.
Gotcha.
And then with Swamp Thing, my remit was you could do a story set in whatever kind of future you want, whether that's now or like at the end of all things.
Oh wow.
And so yeah, so that's kind of how those stories came about. I was presented with the option of like you could do these, or we could have somebody else do them. You come back, you could continue writing the main stories, the ongoing stories that you're working on. And I said, you know, let me go back, let me have a think if I have interesting stories to tell, and if I do, then I would like to do them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then a week later, I went back, sent in the Future State stories. The Catwoman one got approved. The Swamp Thing one got approved. And then a week after I'd finished the first script, the Swamp Thing one got completely turned on its head.
Mm-hmm.
And was saved at the very last moment by an act of exceptionally quick thinking from Mike Perkins, who I have to say is probably of the people I know, has the most encyclopedic knowledge of DC characters. Like I'll go like, I need a character who has this superpower, does this, and is connected to this. Go, Mike Perkins. Go, what do you know about the green meteorite?
Yeah.
What? There's a character like this, and he'll pick out the encyclopedia, be like, look, there he appeared for 4 issues. So what happened with the Swamp Thing stuff was we had a whole Future State idea that kind of is important that it ends in like a global winter, if you will.
Right.
And originally that was going to be either Mr. Freeze or Captain Cold. Right. And they were like, oh, you can't do that. After I finished the first issue, because they had decided to put in another event called Endless Winter.
Oh my God, yeah.
And they went like, well, we can't have 2 winters in two separate events at the same time. So can you change yours to like something completely different? I'm like, no, it doesn't work. Like it has to be winter. And then Mike Perkins came up with like, well, you know, Alan Scott had a son who had the power to like bring this kind of eternal darkness, and technically he could block out the sun, and that would lead to a winter. So I was like, saved. I don't have to rewrite my entire first script.
Yeah,
right.
That's amazing. It's funny, you know, comic books don't come with an audio commentary, so it's really fun to get like these kind of behind the scenes insights into like the development of a story that you know intimately, and you think, yeah, it all worked out. Romvey wrote a script, they said it was brilliant, and then they drew it. You know, it's like, no, that's these kind of things, I assume they happen a lot.
They do, and I think it's part of the joy of working in comics. I mean, yeah, at the time it can be a bit stressful. At the time, I think I went back to my editor and said, nah, listen, I'm just going to rewrite the whole thing. Don't have me just switch to something that doesn't work. Yeah. But I think part of the, you know, for every one example where I get annoyed by it, there's also examples where I'm quite excited by it. Like, I remember when I was writing Swamp Thing, the Suicide Squad movie was coming out, and they were like, we need you to put Suicide Squad in Swamp Thing. And the first time I heard that, I was like, what? Right. Suicide Squad in my Swamp? Have you read my Swamp Thing book? It doesn't really work.
Yeah.
And then I went, no. Actually, it can work. And so I remember sending an email going like, great. My only condition is that I get to choose which members of the Suicide Squad are sent over. And so I chose, very specifically remember choosing Chemo because he's such a Swamp Thing-esque character.
Yeah.
You know, one of this shambling green creature and the other is this shambling chemical vat.
Yeah.
And then picked Nightmare Nurse because she had the ability to like delve into people's minds, and she not only repair you physically, but she could repair you like mentally as well, which was an interesting concept to play with. And then I had to have one character who was just completely out of place in all of this. So I said, cool, I'll take Peacemaker. So yeah, that worked out quite nicely. Actually, that arc is one of my favorite arcs to have worked on as well.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's a celebrated run. The Swamp Thing from Infinite Frontier was one of the like unexpected, you know, exciting elements, because you think, oh, they're going to pitch Swamp Thing. You were like new Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
Like new concept, new
I've-
character.
Yeah, it's surprisingly like I've had that on pretty much every book I've done.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we started off with Swamp Thing, people were like, "This is not Alec Holland.
Right.
It's not my Swamp Thing." And then about 4 issues later, they were like, "Oh, actually, it's pretty good."
Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
And then I went to Carnage, and people were like, "It's not Cletus Cassidy. It's not my Carnage." And then about 4 issues in, people were like, "Actually, this is pretty decent." I mean, we got like the second longest Carnage run out of it.
Absolutely.
And then with Detective, when I started off, people were like, "What is this opera stuff? Like, Batman doesn't do opera." And then about 4 or 5 issues, and people are like, "Actually, this is pretty good."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's a good sign. And all they need, you just got to make sure you work under the contract. I need at least 6 issues. That way.
Yeah.
4 issue, the term.
I think the correct term, I think the official term is "let me cook."
Yes, absolutely. Let me cook. Yes. Trust him. Yeah, the first issue is like it's gonna upset the apple cart, but in a really exciting way. And
because it has to feel like, because you also want people to like sit up and pay attention, right?
Yes.
And if you're just doing the same thing they're accustomed to seeing, even though it might be comfortable, like no one gets excited when you bring in a bag of chips because oh my god, it's the same bag of chips I've been having for like but you bring in, I don't know, chicken cordon bleu, or you bring in like coq au vin one day, and people are like, "Oh, that looks exciting and interesting. I kind of want to try it." Totally. So yeah, I feel like novelty is too often an ignored factor in stories today. I think we've been telling ourselves like, "Oh, all the stories are told. All the original stories are told." I hear that so often from people, sometimes from like creators, and I'm like, no. Why you don't have to be that cynical? Yeah, it's not all the stories I've told. It's just people haven't looked hard enough for new stories from new places.
It's true. You're the one of the most emblematic elements of that, when we want to relate it to Batman, is the resurrection of the Nightfall suit. And the redemption. And when I say redemption, I don't mean like religious redemption, but I mean like the character redemption of Jean-Paul Valley. This use of the character is one of the most exciting in decades.
Well, it also made complete sense. Like, to be honest, a lot of the redemption credit should go to Dan Waters, who did the Azrael series right before. Dan's a very good friend. We talk all the time. He's doing some of the backups in Detective now.
Yes.
So it was very much a case of me going like, "Oh, you did something very cool with this character. Can I continue to use him? Is that cool?" And he was like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And
so it made complete sense, especially given the context that Batman as a symbol is now kind of missing and gone from Gotham in Detective.
Yes.
And so the city is in need of a reminder. And often when you take away one symbol, part of society, another one pops up, but also usually a more violent, a more expressive version of that symbol pops up. And so this kind of perception of Azrael as the more vehement, more rabid version of Batman almost. That made complete sense to do that, and use him in a way. So his angel is missing, and so he is out for some justice, if you will.
Yeah. The apropos of Detective, when your Detective started, the first thing you notice, of course, is those covers.
Yeah.
The is it Evan Cagle? Is that how I pronounce it?
Yep. Evan Cagle on the covers.
What is the synergy between your influence and Cagle's depiction? Because essentially, Detective Comics is a completely different beast from what it had ever been. Like the book is radically different. It has a completely new aesthetic. This could be the new aesthetic for the title going forward, or it could be only the aesthetic for this run on the title.
Yes, but even if it is just the aesthetic for this run on the title, I
It's
think it's
so
great
story.
that
Yeah.
I think it's great that you can then go, okay, 1062 to 1089.
Right.
It looks and feels like this.
Exactly.
And you don't need to explain anything to people what they're likely to see inside, because you have one look at those covers and you're like, oh, I know what kind of Batman story this is.
That's 100% correct.
Yeah. And I think part of that credit, at least in terms of editorial, goes to Jessica Chen again, who was on the book when we started. I pitched the idea of doing this kind of operatic, tragic, lots of gowns and costumes and masks take on it.
Yeah.
And she was very excited by it, and then DC editorial were excited by it. And I remember then going to her and saying, like, look, everything we do should be about that aesthetic. Everything about this should scream opera. Everything. Yeah. And not only did we, and to also be clear, originally I had pitched Evan to do one of the arcs in Detective. And for one reason or the other, it didn't pan out, schedules, etc. But Jessica was like, can we at least get him to do covers? Yeah. And Evan was like, yeah, great. What do you want me to do for the covers? And I just said, think Grand Guignol, think opera, think Phantom of the Opera, to bring that aesthetic into the covers, because I don't think we've seen that. Yeah. And pretty much that's all it took. Ever since then, Evan's kind of been nailing that aesthetic, I would say 9.9 times out of 10. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it immediately it's the first thing you think of. It immediately distinguishes itself on the shelf, and it changes your perception of like what a Batman comic could be, what this Batman comic is in comparison to all the other Batman comics. And there's nothing to say that the current Batman run is great. This Detective run is something very different.
Yes, and I think that's more than anything else. Like, part of when I started on the run, I was told, like, usually Detective ties into Batman. Usually Detective does. But it doesn't have to be like that. You choose. Right. And my instinct was to say, why have two books doing the same thing? Why not have two books doing two different things? Yeah. And so, lots of credit to people who trusted that. But also, I think it's great to see that, every time I see discussion online, obviously there's some criticism, there's some love. But the fact that people who don't like this can go read the Batman book, and people who are not enjoying the Batman book can come read the Detective book. Yep. I think there's something wonderfully comics about that. And there are people who enjoy both. So I think it's the best of all three worlds.
Yeah. I remember reading, I guess it was the first issue, so it was 1062, which was, but when we got to the point where the Barbatos reveal was in the book, and I'm like, what a bold decision, because of how much exposure Barbatos has gotten in the recent past, right? With respect to the metal events. Exactly. But when you look back, and this I think speaks to your Vertigo experience, and I'm sure your original, your older, probably Peter Milligan Batman reads and stuff like that, getting Barbatos back to being this scary, not sensational, but still primordial concept.
Yeah.
And weaving it into the belief systems of this entire book. It's
and also I love the idea of, is Barbatos in the book?
Right.
Or is he just in Bruce's mind?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I still think it's true to even the metal concept of, like, this is the id, the inner ego of the Bat entity manifested. And just that the metal thing takes it quite literally, and I say, cool, it's manifested, but only within Bruce's psyche.
Yeah.
Or is it not just within Bruce's psyche? And I think that, to me, is like the beauty of the medium. the fact that you can do that, the fact that you can have these contradicting versions, or even adjacent versions of characters sitting right next to each other without it feeling like, oh, what the hell, this is absurd.
Right.
I think that's only possible in comics. And I think, yes, there are the sort of sticklers for continuity who are like, well, this is not the Barbatos. But I would say, and my favorite line to use is like modern day mythology. I think that's what comics are. Comics are modern day mythology. And I challenge you to show me one well-developed world mythology that exists without absolutely absurd contradictions showing up.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like, oh, Poseidon is Zeus's brother, but also in some other cases, he is Zeus's father. But also in some, what?
Yeah.
Okay. But we accept that. We accept that.
So, yeah, that is so mythology / religion, where it's like, yeah, there's contradictory elements and people take it literally.
Yeah. And I think comic books are really the contemporary equivalent of that, of mythology being written. And I think people should treat these things with that kind of childlike fascination of like, how amazing that we get, you know, these weird versions of Barbatos one after the other. How amazing that one of them is this kind of big bombastic space dimension hopping dragon creature.
Yeah.
And the other one is a big red bat dressed in a gown, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's great. It's I mean, it takes every element of like the antagonist in religion. It takes like the, you know, Hades versus it's everything. I love how you've said before, and you mentioned it in this episode, the run is ending at 1089.
Yeah.
So you've deliberately structured it to be a 3-act structure of, you know, apropos of a stage play or an opera, which I think is, you know, well done.
Yeah.
What did you work everything you wanted to into this? Because I mean, I'm sure if you were at 1081 and you went, I kind of could use about 4 or 5, you know, I could use about 10 or 11 more issues. You know what I mean? They probably just let you.
Yeah, yeah.
But also work and everything.
Yeah, but also like, it's only possible to do some of the things that this run has done.
Yeah.
If you know exactly where things fit, from right from the beginning, right? Yeah. So like, we did some stuff with Mr. Freeze, and people assume, like, I've seen reviews assume like, oh man, that's a plot thread that was just left. I'm like, no, it's not left. I've got till 1089. And so that's only possible if you know where things are going and you can map far enough ahead to where you can go like, cool, I can leave this here so that when it does come back, people are going to go, oh, I forgot that had happened, and now it's back, and that's cool. Because I love stuff like that. The best example I pick up, I think it's in one of the Invincible run books, where one of the characters gets tossed into the air.
Yes.
In some issue, and then some 20 issues later, he falls back down, and people have totally forgotten who the hell that was, and they go, oh wait, of course, yes, that happened. That's such a beautiful, wonderful, very cool thing that you can do only in episodic storytelling. 100%. But also, it's only something you can do if you plan ahead for it. So,
and I love that we talked earlier about how you love video games where you have to have like graph paper and you have to plan ahead, and how it's like it all informs everything. Like this is how you approach story.
Yeah, and also like I am by profession a chemical engineer, so there is always an engineering aspect to certainly my plots.
Sure.
But I've also learned to go like, cool, I've got my spreadsheet. Now I can ignore it and do what I'm doing. But it's always there. Like sometimes you can follow a thread and you can get a little bit lost. Yeah. You're like, wait, what was going to happen next again? And all I have to do is turn and look at my outline and go, okay, cool, this is where I am. I know where to go from here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's very useful. I think the engineer, like you can't tell heist stories if you can't plan ahead.
Big time. No.
Yeah.
That's right. I have to ask about Aquaman Andromeda really quick, just because it's such a oddity. Like it comes out of nowhere, and I'm wondering, where did that come from for you? Were you like, ooh, I got I got an Aquaman story, or oh, I really want to play with the Black Label format, or some combination thereof?
Yeah, I think it was from the Black Label editors coming to me and going like, "Hey, do you have a take on an existing DC character that is just off from out of left field? It's not. We don't want the regular comics that you would expect to see in the mainline continuity. We want something different. We want something weird." And I said, "Yes, I don't think anyone has done underwater sort of cosmic horror with Aquaman.
Right.
Aquaman, to my reading, has always been this kind of underwater sword and sorcery or fantasy kind of book, even though he's a superhero. And I think that's part of his incongruency comes in, because like, it's superhero, but it also has like sword fights and kings and swashbuckling, which is very cool. I just felt like, but no one's done the fact that we know less of what's underneath the water than we know about space.
Yes.
Like no one's done anything with that. And I kind of said, cool, I want to do this, but also I want to pay homage to all the sort of late 80s underwater sci-fi sort of slash space exploration, cosmic horror sci-fi films that I loved. So there's bits and pieces of Event Horizon in it. There's bits and pieces of the Sphere and the Abyss.
I got the Sphere in there. When I was reading it, I was like, "Oh, this guy read the Sphere," or saw it, depending. Either way, I read and saw the Sphere, and I could tell you, I don't know if there's, I don't know what is a better experience. I'm kind of like, you could just watch the movie. I think you don't need to.
Yeah. I mean, I've read Crichton before, and I think I prefer to. I like his stories, but I think I prefer them as films rather
100%.
than reading the book. So
yeah, same.
Yeah. So that's kind of where that idea was born from. And then also I think we did this kind of drastic redesign of what that Aquaman would look like.
Yes.
And the idea was going to be also that this is a story about first contact, right? In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But when I say that, people assume like, oh yeah, of course he's talking about the aliens under the water.
Right.
Like, no, it's also first contact with Aquaman.
Yeah.
Like this is a story of human beings running into this mythical creature and absolutely not knowing how it functions or how to engage with it. So on some level, the story is also saying like, you will never understand Aquaman outside of the fact that you can relate to him because he looks human.
Yes.
And then if you read the story with that context, you also realize that's Aquaman's struggle. He doesn't understand who he is or what he is, because there's a part of him that will always be the lighthouse keeper's son on an island. And there's another part of him that has like power over the oceans and is a demigod, if you will. Yeah. So those were kind of my thematic obsessions going into the book.
Did you ever read the Aquaman Posner series from '86? Because it reminds me of that. It was the post-crisis attempt at like contextualizing Aquaman, and Posner's like, I'm gonna make him like directly connected with like warrior or warlord and like the Lords of Order and Chaos and all this stuff, like, and also like really grounded it in Celtic mythology for some reason, but it really went with like that whole thing, and I was like, oh man, because there's the blue in it. Yeah, that's where he gets that blue suit that like he
right.
And but it's funny how rarely people go, let's go full myth with Aquaman, as opposed to let's just try to make him relatable or or cool.
Yeah, and I feel like if everyone's relatable and cool, then you're kind of homogenizing who these characters are.
100%.
Like how's Aquaman different from like Batman or Green Arrow or any of these other characters at that point? What makes him unique? And I feel like superhero universes would feel much bigger and much more expansive
Yeah.
if characters were truly allowed to be distinct and unique and kind of contend with their oddities rather than try to shave away the oddities and make them all sort of appropriate and acceptable and good.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah.
Even more ubiquitous word. They're all nice.
Yeah. They all get along and everybody's great and there's no conflict. Ron, this has been great, man. I want to thank you so much for being here. There's
Pleasure.
so much more we could probably talk about, but let's leave them wanting more. But before we do, there is more. Obviously, Detective is still going until 89, so make sure to pre-order your books. And speaking of pre-order, there's a FOC for 2 series that are coming out for you. Dawn Runner from Dark Horse.
Yep. With Evan Cagle, which is a mecha kaiju ghost story romance set across a whole century.
My wife is going to read the hell out of this book. It looks like Evangelion.
Yeah. I mean, for the cross pitch, I would say it's probably Evangelion meets Arrival.
Oh my god! All right, yeah, that's sold. Sold at least 2 more copies, and the other one's One Hand and Six Fingers.
Yep, which is a neo noir or neon noir, if you like, crime story told in 2 parts. One part is me telling the story of a detective who, on the day of his retirement, discovers that a serial killer he thought he put away twice before, like the same kinds of murders, have started to happen again. So he gets sucked back in. And then The Six Fingers, which is being written by Dan Waters with art by Sumit Kumar. Dan tells the story of a young archaeology student with a missing father, and he's been looking for his father, and he's been having these blackouts. And then he wakes up one day and realizes he might have murdered someone in this extremely weird ritualistic fashion when he had this blackout. And that thread kind of is followed in those books. And you're meant to read both books in tandem.
Oh, cool.
And when you do, you get a third story that exists between the 2 books, which might be sci-fi horror.
Awesome.
So, yeah. The idea is that it's a mystery in every way, and you're supposed to put the pieces together, if you will.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. The One Hand is out in February, and then is on FOC Jan 15th. So yeah, please do pre-order. And then The Six Fingers, I believe, is out also in February and should be on pre-order shortly after that.
Awesome. Well, get out your spreadsheets, folks, because that one you're going to need to make to track all the S elements.
I guarantee you, someone's going to have all the clues listed.
Well, don't publish them on Reddit, folks. At least make people do the work. But Ron, thank you so much for being here, man, and thank you everybody for watching.
Thank you for having me.
What's if everybody wants to get everything Rom V, what is the website or link they should go to specifically? Like, what's the
my website's rom-v.com. And in terms of where I'm most active on Twitter, but I don't know for how long, considering the state of that place. But yeah, we'll see.
Excellent.